Tell me this. Now, I mentioned in the beginning this thing about the Arlington Institute that sort of is on the same page with you guys. Are there other think tanks? Are there other people who are in the forecasting business who are basically saying something similar, maybe not based on the same system that you use?
I usually, as a rule, don't read other things so I don't pollute my interpretations. I'm aware in vague terms that other people are citing in on October, and there's been a lot of rumors about it because our data sets pick it up, and our spiders, the little parts that run out on the Internet and grab the words, they are picking it up, and I'm aware of those. But I usually don't read the predictions themselves. However, as George Ure will be quite happy to tell you, we know the Chinese are into this.
Well, that's what I was wondering. Go ahead.
We actually tripped across some of their data gathering. I think it was 2002 that we first came across it. They have a similar language grabbing program out surfing the Internet, except they're doing much larger chunks. And I think we tracked it back to a Chinese supercomputing center someplace in western China.
Hey, George, it was within 50 miles of the epicenter of that quake.
Oh, yeah. Well, there is that, too.
Yeah.
I think so. You mentioned, George, who else is out there. I think some of the best work in the field is coming out of Dean Radin. His paper when he was at Boundary Institute on time-reversed human perception really quantifies, and then he's dealt with it more in his book Entangled Minds and so forth.
I know Dean Radin and have interviewed him a couple of times when he lived here in Las Vegas.
Brilliant guy.
Yeah.
Absolutely brilliant guy. And so, when you get down to the hardcore, show me the science of it, if he can demonstrate in a laboratory setting that people have physical reactions to pictures and graphics, 3, 4, 5 seconds before they're shown the graphic, you can actually get some confidence that what we're picking up in what's almost a linguistic blink lab approach. You know how blink labs work, right?
No, I don't.
Okay, well, a blink lab it's really useful for understanding what we're doing, because what astronomers do is they'll take 2 pictures of the sky in exactly the same place, and then they'll look at the picture, flip back and forth one picture to the other, and that which moves on the picture may be a new object for them, and that's called blinking. And that's really how we look at these clouds of language. We blink lab the stuff, and so the basis of one run, Clif will blink it to another a current run, and we'll see the shift in the language, and that's the area which draws his attention.
And thus, when we get to politics, religion, certain subjects, the language is always hot, and there's very little movement within the blinks.
But you mentioned that the Chinese are looking at this. I've got to believe, I can't imagine why our government would not. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, I'm going to ask you about whether the U.S. government has an interest in pursuing this and whether they're on your butts or not, trying to figure out how you do it. We're going to be right back with more Coast to Coast AM. Welcome back to Coast AM. We're talking with George and Clif about this unique technique they've developed for sort of predicting the future, and it's been pretty grim news so far. Tell me, fellas, you say you had evidence that the Chinese had developed something like this and that they're looking into doing the same sorts of things. I would think that some of these 3-letter agencies here in the U.S. would be all over this kind of thing, and I wonder, are they doing it to your knowledge, and if they're not doing it, why haven't they come and knocked on your door? Or have they?
We've had some history with the military. There seems to be some suggestion that they're not doing this because it's a little too woo-woo. At this stage, right? A little too much voodoo and hoodoo and who knows what. And besides, the 3-letter guys are more interested in who says what, and we don't care about that. So when we do data gathering, we don't take their same approach. Also, I don't know, for instance, if that sort of mindset can effectively use the kind of tool we've created.
Well, those guys have spent a lot of money over the years on remote viewing.
Yeah, I understand that. I don't think it's anywhere near as accurate as what we're doing. And this is a pauper situation. We're in poverty here. So relatively, we live better than most of the planet. But this is not a multi-million-dollar situation with supercomputers and so on. It's a couple of guys that scrounged together, used drives and old servers and kludged the whole thing like that, and we craft our own software. But it really comes from a different sort of view of the planet and how things work.
Let me see if I can explain that just a little bit, George, because it's an important distinction. The current thinking in the military and in the alphabet soup is that they want to be able to do massive databases. So you come up with things like Carnivore and Echelon, and they'll try to scan all the emails and sample long distance conversations, especially those overseas, and look for social networking and try to drill down. The thinking is that if they can find one terrorist, eventually they'll find the network, the interconnection that will lead them to the rest of the network and so forth. Our work is not predicated on that kind of an approach. We don't do drill downs in that regard. What we do is it's much like looking at a microscope versus binoculars. Our work is more binoculars oriented. We're looking for the big stuff, the planet killer, the things like earthquakes and massive change, like this thing that happens on October 7th through March of next year. We can see that stuff pretty well, but we don't have the microscope that if you could find one player in that, you could drill down into it and find out his social, where he works, and go pop him and waterboard him or whatever they do.
There's also another basic supposition we have to go to. They may not need this.
Yeah.
If you're creating it, why would you need to be told you're creating it?
Because you know what's coming since you're doing it anyway.
Right.
You mentioned about you don't have a supercomputer. You're just piecing this thing together. If you had one, could you fine-tune this?
It wouldn't necessarily help. It might allow us to do things in real time. But again, then you get into an order of complexity that I'm not willing to manage. Then you've got to have people to run the thing. You've got to have more programmers, et cetera, et cetera. So it doesn't necessarily help the whole process.
Plus, those are mouths you'd have to feed when everything hits the fan.
Not only that, but there's so much of Clif's background that I don't know that we could duplicate even if we had carte blanche in terms of budget, because where do you find people who are somewhat multilingual, understand the subtleties of language, have an open head to the future? I mean, the shopping list gets to be pretty impressive. And, oh, by the way, you have to be able to fix a national insurance company-sized database on command in your sleep.
Back to the government thing, and I don't want to beat this. Yeah, I got you. I don't want to beat this you over the head with this thing, but you mentioned, you gave me a little hint there. If you don't want to get into it, I can understand why you might not. But you said there had been some contact with the government. Does that mean you went to them and said, "Hey, we've got something you should pay attention to"?
Precisely that. In a fit of patriotic fervor swept up along with the general emotions post 9/11, I said, "Hey guys," talking to the CIA. You want to have a look at this? Through George, and he submitted this brief to him about how it all worked and some examples and so on. And they came back and they said, well, it's pretty interesting, thanks a lot, but not our line of country.
And we still we have many readers between Clif's work and mine that we presume are pretty well connected into the military.
Well, George, we presume because it's a fact. We get visited by .mils constantly. Yeah.
I don't know how far we want to go on that, but we do try to share that which has even.
No, I meant just the drop-ins from the .mil agencies.
Oh yeah. Those guys drop by all the time. But we do try to actively share when we see something big coming, like tonight. We try to share and say, hey, here's something coming down the road.
Well,
here's something coming down the road. Your website has apparently crashed. One of our listeners, Kelly, said that it could be that it's just overwhelmed by Coast listeners. They're pretty they don't waste any time. So, folks, if you're having trouble getting through, I suggest you take it easy and give them a day to get it back up. And
mine is still up. Let me pop up.
UrbanSurvival.com is the one that I was told that was.
Oh no, it's up. I just hit refresh.
Well, good. I'm glad to hear that. And halfpasthuman.com, do you know, is that?
That actually is probably less of an issue, and that goes to just the point I wanted to bring up. We put out free stuff that's in the public interest on George's site. What we do on my site is we try and get enough people that are far-sighted enough and have a need for it to pay us a lot of money, and we're talking a lot of money, to sign up for one of these runs. So I don't recommend most people sign up for my site. If you're worried about this kind of thing, check George's site every day. He's got a free daily report.
what's the story on the goats?
Oh, he's turned into a part-time goat herder.
I mean, why not have
Self-sufficiency.
registered goats to keep your property cleaned up, you know?
Yeah. But in any event, so go to George's site, and you'll get any free information, or we'll put it out on venues such as this show. And there's no real need to come on in and pay for the very dense language that probably won't aid you. I have to be very clear about this because there's all kinds of people out there that get hung up on prophecy, and they've got an addiction, a Jones for it, and a lot of people will pay, good Social Security money that can go to feeding them, clothing them, putting food on the table for their family, and getting medicine. And we don't need those dollars. So please, if you're just worried at that level, check George's site.
Is there something about Antarctica? I know I mentioned earlier I was asking about global warming. Does it fit into this picture in some other way I don't understand?
In a couple of other ways, actually. We have a tendency to segregate our data down to discrete clumps. We call these clumps entities. We assign labels to the entity that kind of describes it. So, for instance, we've got an entity that houses all of the stuff about the populace of the USA. We have another entity that houses all the stuff about the powers that be, based on our language sort of stuff. And Antarctica is very, very, very important to the powers that be. Far more language now than in their little entity than was found 2 years ago, 2 years before that. And in 1998, when we first started getting into this sort of thing, it was virtually not there at all. So it's really scaled up over, say, the last 10 years to the point where about 13% of the linguistics within the powers that be relate to things like Antarctica.
I wonder if
unexplained why kind of things going on there.
Is that like a place to escape to for the elite?
No, it doesn't appear that way. That kind of language is not associated with it, no.
It's more like there's something there they're interested in or something going on they're interested in.
Yeah, it's a big key to whatever is driving them. And they are being driven. Needs must is the double drive. The powers that be are getting really wacky, and it's because of what they know that we don't.
We've heard a lot of predictions about this Hadron Super Collider, and we talk about it on the program all the time. Anything in that regard?
No. We've gotten some things about how it was going to break down. What did we put in there? That there were going to be some orange issues, George?
Right, right.
And it wouldn't be a big deal for anybody. I personally am not worried about it because I don't think that black holes exist. They can screw up a lot of other things. They may cause time loops or who knows what because they really don't understand how the universe works, and they're going to be shooting things at each other that are going to could cause unexpected side effects. However, our data so far, and let me think, that was about, 6 months back? Was that it, George?
Something like that.
Yeah, we had some discussion of it within the data sets and came to the conclusion that it was a juggling act that they keep dropping the oranges.
Yeah, we're not really worried about that. We're more worried about things like the alien stuff that's way off in the future.
Well, I was going to save that till when we come back after the break. We're definitely going to get into some of those exotic topics that are of interest to Coast listeners. I know you mentioned this other prediction where 300,000 lives were lost or changed. Is there any kind of vast change in the population that you see coming now?
Yeah, it's very sad. I mean, we've got numbers that... Now, let me stipulate that we're frequently wrong, and that the Internet is, of course, filled with numbers, so we have a tendency to discount those whenever we come across them.
Right.
Except through this very selective process, archetype upon archetype upon archetype. So we really make it work for us before we trust any kind of number at all. That's why, for instance, we don't do stock prices or any of that sort of thing. But we've got a number that shows up that's and also bear in mind we have a little problem with decimal points, the way our particular setup works, but it's 2 million to 22 million.
2 million to 22 million, meaning lives lost.
Or seriously impacted to the stage where it's not the same life anymore.
Wow. Well, it's a fascinating discussion. When we come back, we're going to get into some of the coast-to-coast topics, ETs and things of that sort, and I'm going to ask you guys, is there a silver lining here somewhere? Because I sure hope there is. Stay with us on Coast to Coast AM.